Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Doug Bell, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Searchmetrics. Today's webinar is on our new quarterly webinar series, SEO Report Q1 2020, featuring Tyson Stockton, VP of Client Services and Account Management, and Kathy Brown, Senior SEO Manager. Just a really quick note on timing. We expect the webinar to take roughly about 60 minutes, as there's quite a bit for us to dive into here. This is a live webinar, so your questions are definitely encouraged, and we'll be sure to address as many as we can during our Q&A session. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session, though, to ask your questions. Feel free to ask them anytime using the Q&A widget. And I've got a little housekeeping for us before we get started. First thing to mention is that an on-demand version of the webinar will be available tomorrow and can be accessed from the same audience link in your email confirmation. We'll also send out an email tomorrow when the recording is ready. To expand your slide area, you just need to click on the maximize icon on the top right. Make sure your speakers are turned up on your system's volume and that your system's volume is not muted. Looking at the dock at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a number of widgets. All of those can be moved, resized, opened, closed, et cetera. So feel free to play around with them and customize the console however you want. For common technical issues, click on the Help widget. But if you're having any technical issues at all, feel free to contact us through the Q&A widget, and we'll try and troubleshoot the problem for you. If you're not seeing slide transitions or if the audio drops out, try refreshing your browser. If you're still experiencing issues, clear your browser cache and log back into the session. And then looking at the dock at the bottom of your screen, to the left of the Q&A widget is the Refer a Colleague widget. If you have any friends who might want to attend the webinar, you can open that up and send them a quick email. In the resources list, there are a number of items we've posted we think you're going to find very helpful. That includes Managing SEO in a Time of Crisis, our new landing page with up-to-date news and tips to succeed in SEO. Our COVID-19 impact on SEO, Managing SEO in a Time of Crisis, and a copy of today's presentation. If you haven't heard of us before, Searchmetrics is an enterprise-level SEO and content optimization platform. We were founded in 2005 as a boutique digital marketing agency. And since that time, we've grown into a global provider of data, software, and expertise that drive online revenue and elevate brands. And before we begin, I know this is a difficult time for all of us, but we're trying to do everything we can here at Searchmetrics to help out the SEO and digital marketing communities. If you go to searchmetrics.com//crisis, we've posted a lot of great content, including a weekly Facebook Live series. Our next Facebook Live series occurs this Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We also have podcasts, blog posts that we think will be helpful for SEOs to manage during this time and be prepared for the growth that when the dust inevitably settles, folks. And we're also offering an SEO performance review for free by our Digital Strategies group, which happens to be managed by Tyson Stockton, who's with us today on today's call, where you can get a personalized session with one of our digital strategy experts. Again, that is free. Okay, now that we're through housekeeping, I'd like to introduce our guest for today's webinar. Let's start with Tyson. Tyson Stockton is the Vice President of Client Services and Account Management at Searchmetrics. Tyson has over 10 years experience in the digital marketing industry. And over the last 4 years, he's at Searchmetrics. He's been responsible for supporting some of the world's largest enterprise websites, including Fortune 500 and global e-commerce leaders. As VP of SEO, Client Services, and Account Management, Tyson manages the services and client success teams here at Searchmetrics. Kathy Brown is the Senior Manager of SEO at Searchmetrics. Kathy has over a decade of experience in technical SEO. We were just talking about the size of her brick telephone just a few moments ago. So we know she's worked in the industry for a while. She's been working with larger enterprises, growing B2B and global e-commerce brands to improve their online visibility. And at Searchmetrics, Kathy partners with our largest clients. She works directly with senior marketing and product managers to grow revenue and increase organic traffic. And finally, myself, my name is Doug Bell, and I'm your host today. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Searchmetrics, and I'm responsible for creating highly focused marketing programs that deliver rapid and scalable revenue growth. Okay, now that we're through that, folks, just a quick word on the format. Our normal format will be Google Updates, technical corner, and then spending some time on industry and trends. Today, we're going to open things up with a bit of an overview on some of the impacts we're seeing from coronavirus, some of which are surprising and some of which maybe not so much. So I'm going to hand things over to Kathy.
Thanks, Doug. You know, who would have thought that ukulele would have been a trending keyword? But if we look at the first graph on the slide, we can see that there's been a peak in interest. Probably less surprising, microphone, you can also see is trending up. That, along with keyboard and mouse, people are searching on that when they set up their home offices. And these graphs are courtesy of meetglimpse.com. They have a nice COVID-19 page where you can see more of these. And another resource you might want to check out is the COVID-19 page on Google Trends. And let's take a look at the third graph for freeze-dried food. And that peak that you see that really big peak, and then it comes down. You know, that's roughly correlated to mid-March, which at least here in the US, that's when we realized the COVID-19 situation was very serious and the first shelter-at-home orders went out. And so I think people panicked. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to get some food. I need to be okay. And as the weeks went on, well, I mean, who likes freeze-dried food anyway? I'm like, well, you know, maybe I want fresh fruit, which you can see as the fourth graph. And you can see that trend up as people understand, yes, there's still food at the grocery stores and I can order food online. So I think the key point I want to make here is, yes, things have shifted, but it's still evolving.
Yeah, and Kathy, I think it's particularly interesting in, you know, the freeze-dried food that you pointed out, you know, that visualize it well, but we know, okay, people's habits are changing. Like, you know, we're all at home now. People are, you know, for the most part, spending a fair amount of time online. And so you have these kind of pockets, these expected areas that, you know, search demand is increasing. But what this really helps us do is it helps us kind of identify and highlight that it's not a stagnant piece. And at the beginning of, you know, the home shelter, there's kind of one set of trends. And then as this evolves and moves on, we're going to see this continuing to evolve and change. And just like the last widget on bidets, okay, so there's a sharp increase, and then people maybe realize, hey, you know, there are still supplies. We can still get TP. Like, we're going to be okay. And so I think for me, it really highlights how we have to be hyper-focused and not looking at, you know, the overall search demand of one sector like e-commerce, but also fragmenting that down into the subcategories and the individual keywords. They're going to have their own kind of curve and their own evolution as we go through this event.
Yeah, absolutely. And my tip for TP, liquor stores.
Yeah, always stay away from the grocery stores there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yes, we're definitely seeing these shifts in demand. So I pulled a couple of graphs to illustrate these. These are from Google Search Console. And as most of you know, the purple line is impressions, the blue line is clicks, and the green line is average CTR, click-through rate. And the first graph is a large online retailer. They don't sell food. They don't sell cleaners or cleaning products. And you can see that sharp drop-off of demand. It's like that shock that, you know, Tyson, you were just talking about. People kind of went in shock, and then they realized, well, we still have to live our life. So you can see a little bit of a trend coming back in as well. I still have to run my household. I still have to wear clothes. I still, I still have to live my life. And so I see this pattern a lot with quite a few sites. The second graph is a site that is primarily pages for bricks and mortars. So there's a lot of pages, but they're all for the bricks and mortar. And obviously the demand has really dropped. I mean, people aren't going anywhere, so they're not searching for places to go. But what I found really interesting about this one is that the impressions are still kind of there. I mean, yeah, they've dropped off a bit, but the clicks and the click-through rate really did drop quite a bit. And Tyson, this sort of goes along with the topic you're going to cover a bit later on NoClicks.
Yeah, and I think, like, especially in that lower graph where you see the impressions not falling off as much, where it's a little softening, but it's not. I think this is something that we've been hearing a fair amount from clients and others in the industry, is with the evolving kind of like search behavior. You not only see that in the sense of like search volume, but also you see it in like the behavioral next steps of whether it's transitioning a search to a click, or it's looking at kind of conversion rates. And I think one thing that's, been common, especially in a lot of non-essential categories within e-commerce, is the notion of, hey, like when this first really went into place and like we all kind of, moved to work from home, there was a lot of reservation, and there still is, as far as like conversion rates. And then we've seen in some sectors, as people have settled into this a little bit more, the conversion rates coming back. So I think on one hand, you have the actual like evolution of how people are searching, and then also elements of what they're doing after the search. And this, especially in this lower graph, it really highlights that, I think, quite well. Kind of going over into some of the other things that we've seen in the quarter is some large swings in like some expected players. And I think there's more obvious expected ones and other ones that are kind of, maybe unforeseen or unanticipated going into an event like this. The Zoom one, like I think everyone's pretty familiar of this, huge spike. So you see in the top graph here, looking at like a few of the online conferencing companies, and how Zoom really was able to kind of catch wind and really have some substantial kind of market share growth from this increased demand. But you see it in some of the other competitors, but not in the same like volume. So it's a clear winner in that sense. Online streaming, I think we're all doing a fair amount of that these days. And, you can see it in the rise of both Hulu and Netflix in this case. When we kind of move on to look at some like, collection of sites, again, there's, your grocery delivery, where, it was a service that was kind of growing in popularity over recent years. But of course, this just gave it a huge push. And also with that are kind of similar related to kind of like the restaurant deliveries. So we see the increase there. But what I thought was really fascinating with kind of this lower graph is looking at Ubereats in particular, where and I forget actually where I came across or read this, but like I saw that someone kind of pointed out that, this new and this changing, or this fast-paced change of search demand is almost like becoming like a new algorithm update, where an algorithm update hits, some sites have to kind of revisit their strategy or kind of be like, okay, this is now the new world we live in. And with these changing search patterns, that's, kind of similar of how we have to adapt to kind of the world that we live in. And looking at Ubereats, you see that they had, and then actually a little bit too, with Grubhub as the top line, you see a decline in the January algorithm update, which Kathy will touch on a little later. But you really see that they took the hit there, and then they never captured this increase that the other domains are capturing from. So I think thinking back of how these changes is something that's worth kind of a reminder, a sanity check of how we have to constantly measure this and keep a pulse on how the industry is evolving, so then we can adapt into how we compete and how we succeed in this space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned that perspective before about looking at this as if it was a Google algorithm update. And obviously it's not. I mean, it's, Google, when it does an update, it changes the search results. And, this is more of a demand-based thing. But I think the steps you take to decide on your strategy are pretty similar. So one of the things I usually do when there's an algorithm update that's impacted the site I'm looking at is I try to look at sections of the site, or even a section of the site that's geared towards a certain search intent, and really try to zero in, because often what you'll see is that the impact is more severe or more positive for a certain section or a certain search intent. And that kind of is illustrated by this graph we're looking at right here. These two graphs are actually from the same site, but the first graph is for the informational pages of the site, and you can see the trend is definitely up, where the second graph is for the transactional side of the site. So there's been a shift in search pattern, People are currently more interested in the informational pages than they are in the transactional pages. But until you split it out and looked at it section by section, you wouldn't have really seen this pattern. So I think that's really important to do kind of the same things you might do with a Google Algo update in this current time. And if you do have Searchmetrics, I mean, another thing that'd be good to take a look at, especially if your trend is up, is seeing what new keywords you might be ranking for that you weren't before.
Yeah, and I think like one other kind of piece on that is if you think it kind of maybe like a running site or someone that sells running shoes, it's like, yeah, there might be some, reservations of making new purchases with uncertainty in the economy, but then you do have this increased kind of demand of the informational queries where they can extend kind of the branding in the sense of like how to get into running, like running training tips, and like those type of informational type areas have a surge and an increase. So kind of catching that wind and being able to still compete with that rising tide in certain sections of the website can be a really effective lever.
Yeah, definitely a great point. Okay, this is my last graph from Google Search Console. And the solid line is mobile. The dotted line is desktop. And you can see, in February into March, this site definitely got more mobile traffic. It's a pretty consistent pattern. And, mobile first has been a story in the SEO world for a while. And for those of us who have looked at organic traffic, we definitely see that we're getting more and more clicks from mobile devices than we are from desktop. Well, that trend has changed or paused, as you can see on the right side of the graph. So, we are in different times and people are at home and they're using their desktop more. So might be a good time to just, make sure your desktop version of your site is up to snuff, especially if you're seeing this pattern that I'm showing here.
Yeah, and this is something too that we've been hearing kind of in different regions and markets as well. And I think, most of us are probably familiar of, mobile, of course, has been increasing across most markets. In some countries, in some areas, like, mobile's even a more significant portion of the traffic than what we see here in the US. And like one example is the Italian market, which has been a very heavily mobile dominant area. And even in kind of that space, they've seen the rise of kind of the desktop usage with people being home more. So I think this is something that we're seeing a trend across globally. And it doesn't change things. Like we still know that, sites are on mobile first index and, you can't ignore one or the other. But to Kathy's point, it's also kind of a reminder of, hey, you need to make sure that you're optimizing both experiences. So as desktop, and I would anticipate that this is going to remain kind of through the duration of this, is going to be kind of just as impactful. And sometimes depending on your segment, it also can have some conversion benefits that maybe you might have challenges from like a mobile standpoint.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm sure you've seen this in many sites that conversions tend to be easier on desktop.
Exactly. I mean, so that's like one positive. And I mean, huge caveat depending on kind of your industry and what kind of, confidence there is around like that body. But I think that's something that, could potentially be a silver lining for some sites, being able to convert the traffic that's coming in through the desktop.
Okay, that's a great summary, guys. I would also note that COVID has come to really dominate all of our conversations, I think, globally, and it's not unique to. It's also not unique to Searchmetrics. In fact, we during our happy hours on Friday, our virtual happy hours, anybody that says COVID has to drink. So let's get back to the pre-COVID world a little bit. And I'm going to hand things back over to Kathy to talk us through the update from January. Kathy, back to you.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, January does seem like it was a while ago and almost another era, but this webinar is a Q1 review. So we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that in January, we did have a Google Core update that rolled out starting on January 13th. And these core updates, generally, they impact multiple SEO factors. It's usually not just one thing. But there did seem to be a bit of an emphasis on EAT and your money, your life sites. So one trend that we noticed was we had some health sites, high-quality health sites such as WebMD, and they had done pretty well in previous updates. But in this last one, they kind of gave back some of their gains. But our winners definitely aren't health sites, or mostly not health sites. There might be one or two. We're Etsy and car gurus. And Tyson, you actually appear on the podcast monthly to discuss winners and losers. And I think you've already done one for March.
Yeah, we've done a few this year. And, we did have a segment where we covered kind of more specifically to this January core update. And, there are a lot of similarities kind of in the websites that, were heavily impacted from this update, as kind of similar to what we saw in the previous year in some of the core updates. So definitely a focus of your money, your life. But I wouldn't say it's like strictly to like the health or finance industries. And kind of, on the health piece, as Kathy mentioned, WebMD was able to kind of, weather the storm, so to speak, but not capture any of the uplift that some of the other sites, or a couple of the other sites, saw. Helpline, for one, actually saw a tremendous growth over this update, so they regained and kind of closed the gap a little bit on WebMD, and are approaching close. Little shout out there to Ryan Bertil, friend of Ben's in the podcast. But that's one website that we've seen actually kind of improving performance. Quickly kind of touching on a few other kind of industries, there were some movement within e-commerce. So Etsy was one of the winning domains. Walmart was another one. So that kind of really kind of solidified Walmart's position as the number 2 e-commerce site in the US from an overall search presence. And Etsy really kind of having a strong last 12 months and being able to take some of that momentum from this last algorithm update and kind of keep the waterline a bit higher. But if there are any additional kind of interest on the topics, would refer everybody back to some of those winners and losers podcasts, where we dive into those a little bit further.
Yeah, and just a week later in January, we also had the featured snippet deduplication. And I'm sure that most people on this webinar know what a featured snippet is, but just a quick recap. Featured snippets are those answer boxes or short paragraphs or tables. Sometimes they come with images, sometimes they don't, that appear at the top of the search results. In fact, we've sometimes called them position 0 results. And this particular featured snippet I have here is just an answer to the query that I typed in, which was implied. I typed in featured snippet, but the implied question was, what is a featured snippet? And that's the answer I got. So what did Google do? Well, it used to be that when you got a featured snippet, you got the link in the featured snippet, usually, not always, but usually you got a link in the featured snippet. And you also appeared in the regular search results. And the deduplication, what it did is it took out that second listings that you got in the regular search results. So if you got a featured snippet, you didn't appear anywhere else on page 1. And what's been really interesting about this particular change is that opinions have really varied on how significant it was. I mean, some sites, they really didn't see much change. Their click-through rates didn't really, maybe dip just a tiny bit, but not really just a much, because most of the click-throughs was coming from the featured snippet anyway, where e-commerce sites, if they had stacked results, the fact that they lost one of those stacked results in the regular results did impact click-through.
Yeah, and I think this has been something that has kind of sparked a fair amount of debate within the SEO community, where, some people, and I heard from different SEOs being like, oh, well, this changes me wanting to be picked up in the featured snippet because I'm not going to get, the clicks to the site. And I think it was an interesting kind of take, and hearing different kind of perspectives on this. But I think there's so many nuances to like the type of information that you're providing in it. And, there are websites that do generate, strong traffic and strong clicks, like through, just the URL underneath the featured snippet. So not having it in the listings hasn't had as much impact. And then, some SEOs or webmasters can be, having a very different experience to it. So I think it's worth noting the type of query and like how you're competing in that space, but then also to not think of it as just one keyword, one URL. And oftentimes, if your URL is being picked up in the featured snippet, it means that URL overall is ranking quite strong. So the collection of keywords around that. So I would, almost take the position of, yeah, even if I may have slightly less clicks because, the user's getting the answer, satisfying the question within the SERP, but then also that URL as a whole, I would argue, is in more cases than not going to be driving more traffic to your site because it's a little bit of a proxy of that URL's performance, knowing that it was, high enough ranked to actually be a match for that featured snippet.
Okay. Again, thanks, Tyson and Kathy. I think it was a relatively calm quarter compared to prior quarters. I'm thinking in terms of bird updates. So let's move over to the technical corner. Let's take things back over to Kathy once again.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, this quarter we saw a couple changes to Google Search Console. So a couple things were added. The first is the removals tool. This actually was available in Search Console, but was there as a legacy report. It's now a full-fledged Google Search Console report. And it pretty much works the way it did before. You can hide or remove, depending on what you're doing, the individual URL, directory, or even the entire site. But what's new is there's two new tabs in the tool where you can view if requests or complaints have come in, either flagging your content as out of date or as adult content not appropriate for safe search. And this is just adding some transparency. It was pretty hard to get this information before. You wouldn't really know if someone had flagged you as out of date. So that's the removals tool. Probably the addition that got a bit more attention is the new review snippets enhancement. So most of you know there's this enhancements menu available in Search Console, and it lists all the snippet enhancements that you have markup for, schema markup for. And it used to be that, or you still can get information about your review snippets through the products enhancement. And, review snippets, I think we all know what they are, but they're the enhanced SERP that have the rating stars. And the way you get those is you mark up your products or some other eligible markup with aggregate rating and review markup. So now the review snippets is its own enhancement. And I think this makes a lot of sense because it's not only just for products that get reviews, but books get reviews, movies get reviews, and a local business can get a review. So now you can dive into the review snippet enhancement in Google Search Console and hopefully not see the sea of red that we're seeing here on the slide. Kind of back on the COVID topic, in mid-March, Google announced that there were some schema updates to support some of the events around COVID-19. These are still in beta, but Google says we can go ahead and use them. And this was really a response to events being scheduled or canceled or rescheduled. And so now we have the ability to adjust our event markup, because that's what this is, event markup, to really reflect the current situation. So there's a new attribute. It's called event attendance mode. And you can now say it's an online event, or it's an offline event, or it's mixed. And also new, but this also got some attention, is the virtual location type that you can use for location, where previously you had to give a physical location. So now you can in your event markup, say, hey, I'm a virtual event and it's a virtual location. And then just to complete kind of discussion on event, the event status has been expanded to just have additional settings. You can set it to event rescheduled or event moved online. And this really helps support some of the events that, have had to change due to the COVID-19 situation. And then finally, just one more thing on COVID-19 is that there's new subtype that's been added to medical clinic. So there's a new subtype called COVID testing facility. So if you have markup that is for a medical clinic, you now have access to this more specific subtype.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. Great progress on Search Console. By the way, some really useful updates on that side. So let's talk about industry and trends. I think we've got quite a bit to cover here with Tyson, so let's get kicked off there. Tyson, take us away.
Thanks, Doug. So doing kind of a little bit of the industry highlight, starting off with new things that has been coming out. And
the rescue, it pulls up Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida.
Do you know the power you have if you search Google around the world and you're the first choice every time?
And yes, Doc, we do know the power that Google has for it. And, roughly we know that Google's still kind of serving up around 2 trillion searches per year. And we know that that is not necessarily declining in any way, but it's really like evolving in the string of forms of questions and how people are making searches. But we do know that that is, and obviously it's our industry here, something that is strong and kind of growing in necessity. And, over the last, last 12 months or even kind of a little bit further, RAND put out a fair amount of information using jump shot data on the NoClick activity. And I think for a lot of us in the industry, this was a little bit of a validation of things that people were feeling and kind of seeing of, hey, I'm not getting the same clicks, or I'm not getting the same amount of traffic that I was generating kind of before. And I think what this did is it really highlighted for us as SEOs of kind of threats to us, or also where we're competing. And, a lot of people will go back into talking of how SEO and SEM are competing against each other. And when you look at these percentage of clicks going to it, organic is so much farther above the amount of traffic that paid's driving, but really that's not threat to us or as impactful of taking away clicks. It's this no-click activity. And seeing that it has this rise, and on mobile, it's surpassed the 50% mark. And, looking at the kind of overall snapshot from the beginning of last year is, almost 50% of all searches on Google were resulting in no click, meaning that the user was answering their question before driving to it. So Google was owning the experience in the SERP that was then taking away from the website's traffic. And the first kind of thing that I thought, and I think a lot of SEOs thought this, is great, that's a staggering, shocking number, but how much of that is really searches that's what time is it in Barcelona, or what work week are we in, and things like that are very informational and just question answer, got it, okay, I move on. And this kind of, I think, opened up a few more questions around how kind of these new integrations that Google's been introducing into the SERP is actually impacting the overall clicks. And so when we look at the overall kind of clicks that are being generated through Google Organic, we see that there's actually a decline of the number of clicks available. And if we look kind of from this data set from 2019 back into 2016, we can see there's almost 5 billion monthly clicks less that's going towards organic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like everybody else, I've been getting my today's temperature, just by looking at my phone and just seeing I'm not clicking through on the results. It's giving me the answer right there. Currency conversion is another one. But I think I wasn't aware of the scale of this until you showed me this data, Tyson. And yeah, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, and I think something else that, just in recap of Q1 is, this information that we just touched on, it's been circulated quite heavily over the last year. But the website jump shot, came across some pretty heavy scrutiny at the beginning, kind of start of the year, which actually led to the disassemblement of that company. And, just for us in the industry here, I think it is something that's worth, giving notice to, because it kind of comes into this like data privacy, what we're able to use as an industry. And it's like, regardless of whether or not you had access to this data or you've been using it, I think that it's something that needs to be kind of acknowledged, at least, is, hey, this line of sight or this information that was available out there is now something that we've kind of deemed as a nation or society of not, being possible. But it also kind of leads us to the questions of what new can we put behind this, and how can we address kind of the questions of, are these just informational questions that are driving these NoClick activity, or is it happening in other kind of segments? So we put together this kind of small sample or study where we wanted to look at separate industries and collection of keywords within those industries to see what kind of click activity is happening, and to shed then light into how the industries compare, and a little bit of kind of just a tool that could be used in how you compete within those segments. So what we did is we took kind of some of the top domains from each of these segments, and we looked at the shared keywords. And we also wanted to remove any brand terms. So for like travel or OTA sites, we take a booking.com, a kayak.com, and then look at where the overlap is, removing those brand terms. So then it's a keyword set that's fairly representative of that segment. So in travel, it could be like hotels in San Francisco. Media could be a variety of news topics or kind of like celebrities, health, like common health terms, e-commerce, running shoes, things like that. And from this, we pulled from the Research Cloud and Searchmetrics 5,000 keywords, or we boiled it down to 5,000 keywords that was representative. And then we ran those keywords through a clickstream data set from October 2019 to December 2019. And we looked for all the matches in that data set. And from this, we have a fairly substantial, or what I would say is, representative collection of queries. And ranging from, most of them are around 1 million queries. They travel on a little bit lower based on the kind of granularity of some of those search trends. But from this, we're able to map out what the actual NoClick activity was from it. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to walk through kind of quickly what the NoClick activity was from each of those data sets. And the first one that we're looking at here is e-commerce. And e-commerce is a space that's kind of like near and dear to myself, just kind of based on my background or where I spent time in the industry. And this I thought was pretty shocking because it was almost the exact same percent of NoClick that we were seeing in the overall SEO industry or the overall search industry. So 48% is NoClick, and that 32% organic, that's where our competition is. That's where we're competing, and that's where we need to succeed. And it is also kind of interesting seeing that, of these segments, this was actually one of the ones that had the highest paid percentage, which I think correctly kind of ties back to PLAs and the prominence and presence that PLAs have, not just on like desktop or mobile, but just a variety of keywords. And I think, it's fairly common for a lot of e-commerce sites to have roughly 80% or more of their ad spend in this PLAs. But it really is, a smaller space and something that we've been hearing a lot of, especially the mid-sized e-commerce sites of, hey, I'm not getting the same output and my rankings maybe aren't moving as much. And this is something that I think directly kind of relates back to that. Going on to looking at media, shocking 63% of NoClick activity. And I think this is, a direct kind of representation of how people are getting the information from the SERP of just reading, headlines and maybe doing a variety of different searches around different topics in the media. And, that 63% is, very shocking. The overall organic clicks, so it's pretty similar to e-commerce at 33%. So this one we see the same tightening, but it's that threat from NoClick, not from necessarily like the paid segment. Moving into like kind of the travel and OTA, and I think, when we were having conversations just internally about this, the first kind of question is like, well, what about Google Flights? Like that has to drive up a huge percent of NoClicks. And it is worth just a reminder that this, is from OTA sites. So it was more heavily focused towards like hotel and lodging terms versus kind of the flight ones that would trigger those. And so within this, we saw that it was actually a lower percentage of NoClick activity at only 27%. And actually having in this segment, which, for me, I was a little surprised of that it was 47% of the overall kind of searches were resulting in organic clicks, which was considerably higher than the last two kind of industries that we touched on. Finally, kind of wrapping out our fourth and kind of last industry that we included in this is looking at the health industry. So I think that's obviously relevant for times today, but is shocking. And this one was the highest percentage of NoClick at 68%. Pretty similar representation of what we saw with the media industry. But this one as well, that Google's really owning that experience and answering those kind of quick questions around health-related terms. But seeing that it's only at 28%, and also knowing that this is an industry that's been kind of so volatile with the recent algorithm updates, it's one more layer that's adding a complexity to it. And what it really kind of brings us back around to is the SERP presence. And I think like what the takeaway that I get from looking at these NoClicks and the activity of once someone's completing a search is how this evolving landscape is impacting our business. And if we look at this coronavirus page, yeah, it's the hot topic right now, but it's like, how much of this is even, elements that we've seen before over the last couple of years? And so it is a crowding space, but it really highlights that even without having maybe access to clickstream data, we're able to look at attributes of the keyword level, whether it's type of integrations or SERP elements that are present in those queries, how parts of the site and how you can cluster those keywords to get a proxy into what the click activity is going to be, and then being hyper-focused into where we're competing, because that's where we're going to have the most kind of impact or return from an overall traffic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this page kind of says it all, right? I'm getting my news without having to really click through. I get so much information looking at this page without having to click on anything. So in summary, you're thinking we need to narrow our focus on strategic keywords. Is that the takeaway I should take away from this?
Yeah, and it's being kind of strategic in it by using the attributes that are kind of available. So if you're looking in, our Research Cloud or search experience, understanding what SERP integrations are present on which keyword tags and which page types. And, it's not as much, hey, I just want to increase my ranking overall, but being hyper-focused into the areas that we want to compete. And I think during these times, as we're all battling with, challenges in the economy, rapidly changing search patterns and behavior, and I think this is the time when some of us might even have limited resources that we're working with, and we have to be more diligent of where we're spending our time and our resources. And this notion of NoClick activity, I think, heightens that even further. And as an industry, we're well-versed in adapting. We all know it's a fast-paced industry. We all know it's an industry that's constantly changing, and we have to constantly revise our strategies and how we go after kind of winning in this space. And I think these times, it's something that we've all become accustomed to because of the industry that we work in, but it has a heightened need and a heightened necessity for us to focus during these times.
And folks, before we wrap up and head off to some of the conclusions we're drawing and into Q&A, all of us here at Searchmetrics seem to swim the backstroke in data. So for those of us that are people that are attending give us an idea of just how far off the norm is with the no clicks. I understand it varies by industry, but just how far off are we compared to quote unquote the normal?
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to determine the normal here, right? Because it is such an evolving kind of space, and I think what we saw earlier in the presentation with like some of the slides from Kathy on like the impressions versus clicks in that very first section, I think right now we're probably seeing that even higher. And it's unfortunate that the jump shot data set was removed at the beginning of the quarter. So we can't say, hey, this is what it was today versus the beginning of it. But I think we see that in the impressions and clicks within Google Search Console. And we also see that by looking at the overall elements that are present in search.
One more factor in the data. It makes sense. Well, Tyson and Kathy, thank you so much. Let's round out some of the conclusions that we're hoping you draw from today's presentation. Then we're going to move into Q&A. So let's start out with the first thing is watch for search trends. Watch them closely and look in there and identify new keywords your site may be ranking for. It's a great tip. Also understand your site's SEO performance by intent and discovery. We covered that a bit earlier. Pay attention to CTR and click trends for your keywords that have featured snippets. Also, you're going to want to check out whether or not your site has out-of-date or safe search complaints. Great new feature in the Google Search Console, by the way. Also, check GSC for errors with your review snippets. And then if it's applicable to you, update your event schema markup, especially given the circumstances with COVID. You've got more flexibility there. And then finally, and I think this is a big one, and I would say that really this is a day-to-day journey for all of us. As an example, our marketing planning is occurring on a 30-day basis here at Searchmetrics. So keep evolving your strategy to compete on strategic keywords that drive the most value. There is lots of opportunity there. We're going to then move on to our Q&A session, folks. Looks like we've got around just about 10 or 12 minutes. And I know Kathy and I know Tyson, you guys have been monitoring the questions as you go. Congratulations. I'm not capable of multitasking like that. So who wants to kick this off, Kathy or Tyson, with the first question?
I can jump in with one. So first question here is from David Rourke, and his question is, could voice search be increasing the no-click results? Any correlation here? Excellent question. This was actually one of my first kind of thoughts too. And I would say no, that there is no correlation there, and no direct correlation. And what I mean by that is this data set is strictly limited to standard, desktop or mobile searches. So it's registering your regular kind of, let's call it text search in the queries, and actually would not capture any of the no search. So the direct correlation would not be there. However, I think you do have some indirect elements. And these ones, I don't have hard numbers to it, but it'd be more in the question of, are people doing voice searches rather than that other search? So then there's a change in volume in that sense. And I'd say just my own kind of personal feeling on that is no, because I think as people are using things like voice search or image search in combination to it, it's a new channel of getting questions answered. And I think if anything, we're just increasing our queries by having new means to do it, not necessarily taking away from what I might search when I'm sitting, at my desk on my computer.
Kathy, what about you? What do you have there? Help from the audience. Or Tyson, if you've got a follow-up question.
Sorry, that I was just reading through the list. There's a couple of questions. I want to do one really quickly from Janet Finley. It says, what is a POA? I think that's from Sotheby's. I think that was a PLA, product listing ads. I think that's what you were referring to. Tyson, did you talk about a POA? I think it was a PLA that we were talking about.
Yeah, PLA or Google Shopping Ads.
Got it. Okay. And then I'll just do another one. I'm not sure how to pronounce the first name, but last name is Gayor from SEO Simple. If I mark my business closed due to COVID-19, is it risky and will it go down a ranking of my business? And I'm assuming what you're asking about is marking your business closed in Google My Business. I'm not sure that the ranking will go down. It's more, and I think this goes back to that slide I showed earlier on, where you saw that the clicks and the click-through rate really dropped. The impressions didn't drop as much. I think you'll be ranking the same. What's going to change is less people are going to search on your business, and they're just not going to click through because they see that it's closed. And to be honest, if you don't mark it as closed and you really are closed, that's kind of a bad user experience. So I think I'd go ahead and do that.
And I got one more here, and it's from Jeff Costello. And the question is, do you anticipate another Google algorithm update this quarter? And this is a common question, and this is one that we don't know the answer to. So I think what we can do is we can look back at kind of previous trends. I think, towards the end of last year, we saw a little bit of a fury of updates where it seemed like it was one after another with the core updates and BERT. And, it was a little bit heavier than we normally saw from Google during that time. But I'd say, like, looking back over the course of the year, there was one in the beginning, another one in March, then July, and then September. So it was almost kind of hitting like a once a quarter piece. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another one in Q2, like from previous years, seen in March and not having like a significant kind of core change right now. I think that, raises caution regards. But then also, we're in a little bit of uncharted territory here where, we don't know the impact of this. I think, Google, just like all of us, are monitoring very closely of how search patterns are changing and how that's fitting into the algorithm. So I think it's something that's definitely a possibility, but I wouldn't say there's like a heightened risk or a heightened concern around it more than any previous years.
Okay. There's a couple more questions. Tyson, do you want to tackle the one about dentists and they're buried under COVID-19 and should they continue doing SEO?
I think it's a good question that applies to local businesses.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know my answer. I would say yes. You may want to, of course, everybody has limited resources, right? And so you have to really budget carefully on what keeps your business afloat. But we will get through this. There'll be a day when COVID-19 is less of a factor. And I think you want to just keep some efforts in play just because, think about it. If your competitors do nothing and you do just at least a little bit and improve your site and improve your SEO, then you'll be that much the better when you come out of this.
Yeah, and I think it's an intriguing question too, because, it has elements of like, what to do with PPC or kind of SEM spend and, combination with, what you're doing on organic. And I think this is definitely a time to be, hyper-focused, like we mentioned earlier, but also very strategic in your spend. And I think a lot of us are operating with, limited budgets and keeping a very, very, very close eye on the conversion rate. Because I think what we saw and kind of what we mentioned, early during this kind of the early March period is there was immediate shock where we saw web activity remaining high and then conversions kind of just all the uncertainty kind of like, halting in some cases. And then that changes a little bit more in the sense of, okay, we're settling into this, we see conversions going back. But I think from a paid perspective, that throttling of spend and not pumping out spend when you're seeing conversions drop way down. And then also using SEO is also kind of the proxy for that. And so I think you don't want to just be constantly running those ads. Let your SEO take some of that kind of surge, especially on the informational kind of queries, and then reserve that paid budget for the very rifle, narrow focused kind of targeting that then is going to allow you to get the most impact from that traffic.
Really good question from Daniel Nelson here from Fandom. If you want to take that, Tyson, I can read it out to you.
Maybe we can wrap up with one more. Daniel Nelson is the question. can you expand on informational or transactional site usage? What do you think about informational usage as gaining more traction? Is this relevant to many industries, or was this specific to a few industries? This is an excellent question, and I think like informational transactional, it's going to have more relevance, of course, to particular segments. I think an obvious one can be kind of illustrated in e-commerce. And so within e-commerce, going back to the example, you could have, running shoes, Nike running shoes, best running shoes, and all those are, I would say, more of a transactional intent, where the consumer is looking to make a purchase. There's a decent, expects, over a 2% conversion rate on those type of queries. And informational, more of the, how do I get into running? What is, the best running training schedule, things like that. And as far as like parts of the site, it's pretty common for websites to have, their blog in a certain folder, like a resources section, or like, kind of just a general editorial portion of the site where they can have some of that longer form content, attack the user in the early kind of stages of the buying cycle. But I think looking at those parts of the site, and if I'm e-commerce, category product pages are typically going to have a collection of transactional terms, where your blog is going to be more informational basis. So I think also to the question of gaining, like, why do you think it's gaining more traction? Well, I think, all of us are spending quite a bit of time, on our computers at home, and, not having the same ability to go out and other activities. So it's like people are spending a lot of time online. So with that, you're seeing this kind of surge of kind of online activity, but it's not necessarily people being like, hey, I need to get a new suit, or I need to, it's like fashion's been a pretty heavily impacted segment. And so your more formal fashion kind of items are, the conversion rate and the traffic there is decreased substantially. And then your kind of loungewear and things like that might be increasing more. So I think the increased traction from it is more from these changing search patterns. And I do think that there is some relevance to certain industries over some, like some websites, media sites are going to be largely just all informational because, they're not selling a product. They might be selling ad space on the page. So I think it's a great question, and it's definitely something that I'd highly recommend, all of us SEOs pay close attention to, and understanding like users and the activity that they're taking on our sites once we get them there.
Yeah, Tyson, that's a great point. It's something we're all trying to balance too right now, no doubt about it. So we have just enough time for just one final question. And what I wouldn't mind doing, and I think folks, if Searchmetrics, we've got we're lucky to have a very who's who list of, giant brands and e-commerce folks. So we get quite a bit of insights into how the market's reacting, at least our slice of it. Tyson, without revealing names, can you maybe share what we're seeing with some of our own clients? What are they doing and how are they reacting, kind of reprioritizing in the face of COVID? Yes, I will have to drink 7 or 8 times on Friday's happy hour, but it'd be great to close things out there.
Yeah, I'm going to do that one, Doug. But yeah, so, I mean, this is a good question. And I'd say like, you're going to have a pretty big range. So I think like the first piece of it, is every industry is being impacted differently. So the world that one SEO might be living in is going to be totally different than another. And then the other piece is with that, a lot of teams are going to be operating with less resources. Maybe it's reducing of hours, or maybe there's the worst case scenario and there are layoffs within an organization and you're working with a smaller product team. So I think that's the biggest piece, that you're having to kind of reevaluate inventory for your bandwidth of what you can get out. And from the hierarchy, being repetitive of the points is, being very hyper-focused in where you're spending your time. I think some of the common themes that we've been hearing across sites is some websites that are, hey, we know that there's this surge of informational. We don't know how long this is going to go. We're going to use this as an opportunity to strengthen our content assets and focus on developing content for that kind of early stage to build more brand awareness. When conversion rates come back, we'll be in a stronger place. So I think that's one. The concept of it too is something that I think can be applied across the board, in the sense of preparing yourself and thinking the terms of what do I need to do in the next 30 days to kind of weather the storm and keep, my business afloat. But then also, how do I position myself to be stronger when we come out of this and we see the transactional, the economy kind of producing the same kind of volumes that we got accustomed to in the past? I think other areas is taking that same piece and doing kind of like a technical, revamp, going back to some of those larger site performance initiatives and maybe stuff that got deprioritized in the past because of the volume of work and other kind of go-to-market initiatives that would fit into that. And so I think it's that type of hygiene, technical, and content, and it's all within the notion of strengthening your site and coming out of this stronger than you were when we went into it.
That's a great summary. Tyson, thank you so much. I'm going to make a couple more quick plugs before we close out. The first is we mentioned a podcast quite a bit. That's actually the Voices of Search podcast. You can find it on any of your podcast platforms. Just search for Voices of Search podcast. And before we close things out, I just wanted to extend a big thank you to the audience for all the questions today. And also a big thank you to Tyson and Kathy for your great knowledge and for participating. If we didn't get to your question or you think of more, you can email us at hello@searchmetrics.com. There's also going to be a very short survey after the webinar closes. We'd really love your feedback. We're constantly striving for great feedback in these events, and it really helps to get your feedback in terms of whether we've met our goals to produce that great content for you. We really hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe and healthy, and have a great day.